Let us now move from the ashes of the Holocaust, where Ledford's paper ends, to Asaf Likovsky's paper, to where Asaf Likovsky's paper picks up. Turning now to the way these themes regarding the characterization of the law resonates in his paper on Jewish lawyers and the failed Jewish Revolution of 1948. Now, to some degree, there are dimensions of the narrative that involve a story of transition, something I've explored, rather than revolution. And when the term revolution is used, this imaginary, the imaginary is a distinct break. As Likovsky says, it's a shift to what was imagined was a broad-scale change of Jewish law, which would have involved a new political identity, a new Hebrew, juxtaposed to the pale, thin diaspora Jew. Now, it was clear from his story that the desert generation, with all of the Sinaitic metaphors of the 40 years of waiting, wasn't ready for that new identity. And to be sure, there are clear context of transition which suggests that that expectation was overstated. It's very rare to have a complete legal change in periods of political flux when there aren't consolidated institutions. And in terms of the transition, it's the absence of significant transformation is to be expected. So I would say that from the beginning, we would think that this idea of a legal revolution, full legal reform, was probably overstated, and any change would fall short. And in fact, this story is rather common. The story in Israel is more common than not, and that in general there's at the very least partial legal continuity, and that it's rare to have complete discontinuity. Usually the line of legal change is symbolic. But I think that there are also interesting dimensions that relate to the theme of this apolitical law that helps us understand even more particularly why the founding fathers in Israel rejected the appeal of legal revolution. And that is, if you think back to the way we were considering the diasporic histories of how Jews had related to the law, we can better understand why the founders don't embrace a certain political potential transformation to Jewish law that would have related to the political founding of the state. Now, I want to explore a number of reasons that tie into how they favor a view of law that's disconnected from majoritarian politics and national identity, and in fact have a distinct skepticism and fear of this identity. The prevailing lawyers, as Asaf tells us, opposed ostensibly on self-serving grounds, preferring mandate law as a professional elite, and also conceiving for years English law as rule of law. So it's a puzzle. Why is the law that's retained associated with England, even though that's the law associated with the mandate and not with the new freedom and democratization? But as we can also see, by the mid-20th century and the founding of the state, there's already an established view of the law and a fear of the law understood in precisely the new terms that the state would have contemplated, and that is law is the product of the will of a majority. And as in all prior historical instances, this was persisted as being viewed as other people's law. What's interesting is that the skepticism didn't go away even when we were running, when Jews were running the political institutions. Because insofar as law is involved, it was seen as inevitably connected with politics, fear of that, and as representing a somehow oppression of the majority. Despite the establishment of the state, this view persisted. The narrative is that they weren't ready. That's how they call it. The same way as Germany reflects on its absence of a post-war constitution. It wasn't ready to entrench a constitutional identity or legal system, and they would remain transitional in this kind of limbo state. And there are very interesting parallels with Germany and Israel in that regard. Very often they would say that it had to do with demographics, that there were missing people that weren't there yet. So Germany refers to the East that way, that there wasn't unification with the East, and Israel would say that its diaspora was missing. But that's, this myth of unity, that unity would make them feel that that this wasn't going to be a law as a product of oppressive majority politics. So it's very, very interesting that way. Now, in terms of the appeal of halakhic law would have had to contend with two problems. One is the controversy over its provenance, and that is that it wouldn't get the new Israeli away from the history in the diaspora. It would seem to run into some of the many concerns relating to diaspora, but also because it would have involved a very arduous and difficult political struggle between conceptions of political and religious Zionism. So again, it would involve a legal identity that was tied up with a difficult political battle, and that was not to be contemplated. So in many regards, this was overdetermined. Many factors why at the founding of the state there was no sense of of bringing together the legal identity with the political, but rather inheriting the law and retaining a conception of law that remains outside of contemporary politics. Which brings me to the last paper by Pnina Lahav, which is the more recent chapter, and that is From Argentina to Pollard. She writes of two affairs which reflect an ambivalent relationship which I've been tracing now of Israel to the law, and in particular I want to say international law. I found this paper of particular interest since my own family was bound up in the affair, and I learned something about why certain members of the family left at the time. But let me zero in on an ambivalent engagement with the law, and that is that by the time we reach the contemporary moment that she's describing, Israel's attitude on international law, and I hear this a lot because I'm involved in human rights, is being compared to American unilateralism and indeed American exceptionalism. And Pnina refers to the shared military commitments that might explain that. But I want to say that that the attitude and stance that Israel has adopted with respect to international law actually reflect to the international community and its skepticism about General Assembly resolutions, for example, at the UN, and its reluctance to seriously engage in political involvement in those debates, but preferring to remain generally to the side, and unwillingness to stake out these positions in these fora. Now, before the Second Intifada, there seemed to be the potential for a space for a new identity, but so far that space has not come. And indeed, I would argue that with the Second Intifada and with the recent Lebanon war, the relevance of these questions has only grown. At present, in regards to its approach to adherence to international rule of law, Israel has adopted a complex as-if position, which is that in a number of instances, the treatment of security fence, the law in the territories, it follows international law as far as the normativity of it, but not because it's bound, and that is that it rejects the political bases of these legal commitments. So, for example, in the Eichmann affair that Pnina writes about, Golda Meir's eloquent speech at the United Nations called for the international community to understand Israel's, quote, lesser evils approach, that if you were comparing the Holocaust and the kidnapping, there was no question of where you would come down. Now, what she was doing in this very eloquent speech was deploying law of war, international humanitarian law norms regarding necessity and proportionality, which are very much a basis of today's current international humanitarian law and debates about Lebanon again. Now, I just want to say, obviously, we don't have time to go into all of these fact scenarios, but that the ambivalence toward international law as towards earlier national law persists, and but it's a very complex ambivalence, and that Israel, while it characterizes itself as a potential target of politicization of this law, is in almost all cases adhering to the law of humanity, to the law of war, and to occupation law. To conclude, this turns out to be just the most contemporary chapter of historical and far-reaching Jewish legalism, which I would characterize as a cautionary tale.